If this video was helpful, hit the subscribe button. I really appreciate it.
Hey, do you notice anything about the car?
It's quiet, it's purring like a kid.
Yeah, it's not vibrating anymore, is it?
You're right. It's
I
nice,
changed the motor
like
mounts.
normal.
It
There
is
you go.
literally doing what? Perfect.
Hi everybody, welcome back to Jay Hunto's Garage. In this episode, we're changing motor mounts on the 2006 Chevy HHR. It's going to be all three of them. In general, symptoms of a failed or worn motor mount would be vibration in the car, clunking noise when you're putting it in drive or reverse, or when you're stepping on the gas.
Yeah, it's not as clunky.
It's not as clunky, thank you.
Nice.
You can usually tell by opening up the hood, have somebody inside that puts a car in drive or reverse with their foot on the brake and just barely touching the gas, and you'll be able to see the engine moving excessively. Here's the new motor mount. This one is the upper motor mount. Goes on the passenger side of the vehicle. This is your rear motor mount, which connects to the transmission, and this is the front motor mount, which connects the engine to the front subframe. Little background on this repair. These are the almost original motor mounts. Back when this car had probably 30,000 miles, I was getting a clunking sound every time I go over a speed bump at an angle. So it would articulate the suspension. You hear a clunk clunk. And for the longest time, I thought it was the steering connection from the steering wheel to the rack and pinion unit. Turns out that wasn't it. I've replaced the upper strut bushings. I've replaced the sway bar end link bushings, and subsequently had the exhaust coupler, flex coupler that connects the exhaust pipe to the exhaust manifold. That's cracked on me twice. Recently, the second time. First time GM took care of it, and it was covered under warranty. So I changed the motor mounts back then, thinking that it was that the motor mounts were just worn. As you can see, they're just this aluminum piece here encased in rubber that takes up the vibration. So with those being worn, you've got rubber hitting metal, or I'm sorry, metal hitting metal without any isolation. So I ended up changing those to no avail. So I kept the old ones. Now 170,000 miles and probably 8 or 9 years later, these motor mounts need to be changed. So I bought the new upper motor mount. Yeah, but it's got to be better than a worn out one. So I'm going to change this, as well as the one in the front, which is, these are so easy. 2 bolts, one here, and then 3 bolts across the top. Easily accessible. You got to pull the air cleaner and the windshield washer reservoir out of the way to get to those bolts. This is the rear one. It's obviously got 1 bolt that goes through the center and 3 bolts that go into it here. 1 in the front, 1 bolt here, 1 bolt in the center, 2 bolts up here that actually bolt to the engine. It's just bolts. You can do this at home. You will need a floor jack, and just to support the engine, and probably going to need to get the car up off the ground a little bit, set it up on jack stands, just so you can have access underneath, and then jack up the engine, put a piece of block of wood on top of your jack, so because you're going to be right on the oil pan. Let's do it. This is a job that just takes common hand tools. First thing I'm going to do is take off the air cleaner, which involves a screwdriver, and disconnecting this connector right here. Here's a tip. When you disconnect this, put it somewhere where you're going to see it disconnected, I put it right there so that I remember to connect it, because it's real easy to put everything back together. Forget that connector because it's down there somewhere, and then start the car and you immediately get a code and it starts acting funny, and check engine light and all kinds of weird stuff happens. It's just that easy. Okay, that comes off. Here's your hose for your washer pump. So we're gonna remove that, plug it, and set it somewhere in a such an angle that it doesn't leak. Okay, here's the motor mount. These two nuts, these three bolts. Okay, for this top mount, I'm going to, got my block of wood on top of the jack, so I'm going to put it under the oil pan and just barely lift the engine right there, just to take the pressure off of this engine mount. Okay, these two nuts here are 18 millimeter. You will need a deep well socket to get to those. The three bolts on the top are just 15s, and can use a regular shallow socket with an extension if you like. If you find these bolts are coming out really with a lot of resistance, you might want to try lifting your engine a little bit more with the jack, because it might be lowering the engine down. Might be actually holding the engine by the supports, by the bolts. Conversely, if you've got the engine too high, it could do the same thing. Just got to find the sweet spot. Should be able to get the bolts out by hand if you've got the engine sitting right. There we go. It just barely hangs up on the lip of the valve cover. Okay, there we go. Old one's out. Let's compare. This is the old mount. This is the new mount. And you notice the distance in between the rubber and the frame here isn't very much at all. Over here is a big gap. I can stick my finger in it. So this one has collapsed all the way down, and is really taking its toll on the rubber. You can see how collapsed it is and how much higher this one is. On the back side, looking at these indentations, and you see cracks in the rubber, this one is significantly higher in this, especially you can tell in this recessed area. This one, the recessed area, as you can see, is just about collapsed all the way. You can see in this one just how far this top metal piece has moved down. This one is almost all the way at the top. This is the flex coupler I was telling you about earlier that cracks pretty bad when this upper mount is bad. So I've replaced it with this type, which should not do that again. This is the rear transmission mount along with the heat shield. It's easily seen from the top, but we'll be taking it out from the bottom. And here is where the front motor mount goes. This is the area you'll be working in here. Now we can install the new motor mount, making sure we get the engine aligned so that the bolts go in. I recommend you get them all in get them started by hand first before you tighten with the ratchet. Now we can put the windshield washer reservoir back in. With all of that back together, we can install our air box. Installation is just reverse order of disassembly. Don't forget to hook up your cable. We're going to be changing this motor mount now. Alright, the vehicle is jacked up and supported on the driver's side. Okay, the motor mounts are located here on the driver's side, and the other one right back there with those 3 bolts that you can see right there. Okay, this is your lower bolt, which is an 18 millimeter, and this one is also an 18 that goes directly through it. So you get these 2 out and the 2 up above that go into the engine block. As you can see, I have the engine supported under the oil pan with a block of wood, so it doesn't fall on me. It wouldn't anyway, but it's good just to help get your bolts out. Alright, as you can see in this motor mount up on the top side, there are 2 bolts. I'm currently getting this one out. It's an 18 millimeter, and then I'll get this one out probably from below. Okay, that bolt's out. I'm going to go underneath, see if I can get the other one from down there. Okay, we're down underneath, and there's tons of room to get this bolt out. You see that? There you go. There's the bolt, so it'll be easy to get a wrench in right here and get that out. Alright, it's loose already. Installation is the opposite of removal. You can handle that. Alright, I got the motor mount out. This is the one I just pulled out. I left the bolt in it so I would not get the 2 mixed up. This one has got some serious wear here. I don't know if you can see that all that well, but it's a little deformed down there. I mean, all in all, it doesn't look horrible. There's a crack down in here that may or may not be causing a problem, but I'm going to go ahead and put this original one back in just because it looks so much better, honestly. And it's seen a lot less heat cycles than this has, although it is at least as old as this one, or maybe a little bit older. But going back with this one. Like I said, installation is the reverse of removal, so I'm not going to bore you with that. I have a whole bunch of other things to bore you with. As with any repair, make sure you get your bolts in finger tight first, all of them, before you tighten them. If you don't, you might not line up one of the bolts right and end up cross-threading it or not getting it in all together. So finger tight, then tighten all of them in sequence, according to the proper torque spec, of course. Okay, all 4 bolts I took out are installed and all 4 are tightened. If you take out 4 bolts, make sure you not only install but tighten or torque all 4 bolts. Okay, and now we're going to take out the rear transmission mount and go ahead and replace that. Okay, first thing I'm doing is taking the bolt out of this portion of the motor mount, which is up there. If you follow the ratchet's sitting on it, and it's a little bit of a clearance issue, but it should be okay. Between the exhaust and this heat shield, I had to bend the heat shield a little bit just to get it out of the way to get some more clearance, but should come out okay. Getting the mount out of there is gonna be something though, but we'll get it. And then it's just these 3 bolts, and then put the new one in. Okay, again, this is an 18 millimeter ratcheting wrench, and these 3 bolts down here are 15 millimeter. Okay, this is the bolt, the long one that came out, and it's got a heat shield to protect the rubber from the heat of the catalytic converter. Just make sure that one goes back on. Okay, now we're going to take off these 3 15 millimeter bolts. All 3 bolts are out, and I have lifted the motor mount out of where it sits and looks like it comes out fairly easily. So let's see what it looks like. Here's our 2 transmission mounts. This one I just took out. I left a bolt in it just to make sure I didn't mix them up. And we do have some cracking here, but that is about it. There's a little bit of a gap under here, and this one has more of a gap. So this one obviously has seen more miles, more heat cycles. It's starting to crack. Keep in mind this is after 200,000 miles, probably 170,000 miles if memory serves, and it's not in bad condition. It's wearing as expected, as anticipated. So it's probably a good thing I'm changing it, and this one should last the foreseeable life of the car, because if it gets time to do these again, I'm sure I won't have the car. So this one's going back in, and 3 bolts in the bottom. It's actually very simple. When you're installing this, it's gonna sit in between 2 big pieces of aluminum. This heat shield goes on the outside of said mounts, basically. Not close up here, but on the outside. So you'll want to slide this in and then put your heat shield on the outside. Installing these bolts here is a piece of cake. Installing the long one that goes through the motor mount is another story. It's easy to get in there and get the heat shield situated, but you're gonna have to finagle the jack, move the engine up and down just a little bit to align that bolt to its to get into the threads. Just FYI, took me a little bit of time, but I got it. All right, just to wrap up, total time for this project: upper motor mount, 10-15 minutes to do that. Maybe 20-25 if you're a novice and never done it before. The lower motor mounts, I'd give it a good 30 minutes each. Taking the part off, putting the part on, having the car jacked up, use jack stands, and having to finagle that long bolt in the back transmission motor mount, that transmission mount, that you've got to account for aligning the engine and the transmission so the bolt goes into the threads properly, and getting the heat shield on. So all in all, without any of this video work, an hour, maybe an hour and a half, because I've done it before and I know what I'm doing. Novice, give yourself 2 hours or so, and make sure you have somebody to call just in case you get in trouble. If you like the video, hit the subscribe button. I really appreciate it. Thanks, and have a great day.
You should save my little wording. You can use it in your videos. She's purring like a kid.